in 1925, did I say Scopes or did I say the Dover? If I said Scopes, I was wrong. I did a show about the Scopes monkey trial. It was called the monkey trial because H.L. Mencken actually called it the monkey trial, and he was a famous columnist at a time. Ed Asner and I went around the country and did the actual trial transcripts from the Scopes monkey trial. That was in 1925. The Scopes monkey trial was about the fact that in Tennessee, the legislature said that there can be no teaching in the public schools of anything, of essentially, I'm trying to remember the actual wording, but it's not the point. You cannot teach evolution in the public schools. And so the ACLU and Clarence Darrow, along with William Jennings Bryan, and there was this trial. It was done as a publicity stunt. And the publicity stunt was this, and that is that Dayton, Tennessee was a little town that had lost their main manufacturer, and I can't remember who that was. Maybe it was a cement factory or something like that. And a lot of people left town, like 800 people in a town that was about 3,000. So it was a lot of people. So one day they came up with this notion, and that is that could they perhaps not do a stage an event? In other words, have their teacher, John Scopes, who was a substitute teacher, and he was also the phys ed teacher who had taught for one day taught for one day evolution out of the book. Could they not, in fact, be the ones that the ACLU was looking for? And so it started off that way. It got completely out of hand, and ending up in a real circus. It was also the first trial that was ever broadcast by radio, and in 1925 it was a huge deal. The essence of the trial was that Scopes was found guilty of teaching evolution, and that was sort of it. It was not until 2005 at the Dover Intelligent Design Trial in Pennsylvania that the whole issue came back up. I'm sorry to get off on this very academic discussion. So why don't we go with some of your questions? Yes?
That would help if the mic was on. Oh,
there we
it's
go.
on. It's on. Never mind. So my question is, was it very hard to adjust to voice acting instead of traditional acting? How hard was that for you?
Well, you know what? Interestingly, the person who, the limo driver who brought me in last night from the airport asked me almost the exact same question. I don't really consider myself a voice actor. I think that this is the way it started out. This is how I described it to him. You know, you're 13, 14 years old, and when a lot of actors sort of begin to think, gee, people start thinking, gee, I really enjoy acting. And they start off on that road, and then when they have to start making a living at it, the road kind of bifurcates at that point. It splits. And some people do very well in commercials, but not so well in plays and television and in movies. I did better in plays, television, and movies. Others do very well in doing voiceovers, and they're usually, the stuff like, whatever, BMW, that type of stuff, all the radio ads and whatnot, and I was never good at it, and more to the point is that I actually never tried to be. They were, in a way, like commercials for me, and I wasn't that interested, and I was very fortunate in that I didn't have to make a living. I was making a living in this other area. When I became sort of known, people then would ask me to narrate things or ask me to do cartoon jobs and what have you. But I didn't approach it that way. So when then I go into a room nowadays, and it's a room that's made up of voiceover people, they have many different characters that they have developed. You know, they've got this character and this character. You know, all these characters that they have developed and they're really good at. And I don't. I've been hired just to do whatever it is that they've hired me to do. But it's always a moment of kind of tension for me, because they'll go and they'll come in, the director will come in, and there might be 6 or 10 of us there, and they'll go, "Oh, Bob, you're playing the character you're playing, the one character playing, but we need 3 other characters." And they're like, "Oh, okay, well, how about if I do that?" Okay, that's good. And then they'll go around like that. And I'm thinking, please don't choose me. Please don't, because I haven't approached voiceover work that way. But there are people who do, and they are very skilled at what they do, much better than I am. I just have been fortunate, and that is people have hired me, like I guess you might want to say about, My Little Pony. I simply got called. We have a character for you. Are you interested? I read it. I went, sure. Okay, next.
Hello. Speaking of that, as you know, the internet loves My Little Pony, and I was wondering if you've seen any fan art of you or Discord that you are particularly fond of.
Pretty good, huh? You know what? I'm sitting down because I can actually see you. Yes, I've seen lots of fan art. And one of the things in which impressed me a lot about the My Little Pony fandom is the artwork. The artwork and the music. Interesting that in the Star Trek world, it was science. It was, the fans were interested in science. They were interested in movies. They wrote a fair amount of fan fiction. That was their expression in the My Little Pony world. It's the artwork and the music.
Thank you.
Yeah. Next.
Hello. I loved you as Eugene in Days of Our Lives, just by the way. That was my favorite show.
You know, probably in all of my acting, that was the most fun I ever had.
I can see it.
Yeah, we had a great time doing it. People have asked me for years why it is that I didn't stay. A couple of years ago, they asked me to come back, and I ended up not going back. My feeling is that you can't go back. As I explained to somebody who came to the table, I said, do you really want to go back and visit one of your old boyfriends?
Anyway, I did have a question.
Yeah.
When you were on Breaking Bad, did they approach you for that role, or did you?
No, I auditioned for that role. And one of the things in which, one of the things that's really nice about the profession that I'm in is that every once in a while you get an opportunity to touch somebody, that somebody goes, oh my gosh, which is what our business is. Our business is about showing, giving us an insight into who we are. I played a character on Breaking Bad who, my only interest was my daughter. My daughter was a drug addict. I didn't understand at all what was going on. I was only concerned about making her better. So it made me sort of an innocent in the show, and someone who was deeply, deeply touched and moved by her struggle, and she ultimately dies. I've had kids, I'll call them 20-year-old guys, come up to me and sort of who looked to me like they had lived already really hard, and come up to me and say, "Hey man, were you Jane's did you play Jane's father?" And I go, "Yeah." And they go, "Yeah, well, I guess now I know what my parents went through." I went, "Oh, wow." So that's when that's when theater does its best.
I also love Days of Our Lives. That your character was great on there. But talk about, what was your favorite episode to do of Next Generation?
I think All Good Things, which was the last of the Next Gen things. It sort of, I didn't have that much to do. I mean, I had enough, but let's say that there were 6 scenes, which was probably all that there were. They were sort of essential scenes. They cut a really nice facet on this, rough stone, and with that, I saw the opportunity of being able to cut, 1 or 2 more really clean facets for the character to communicate a little bit more. So I think that was the show that.
It was very satisfying to wrap it up the way
It was,
it began.
yeah. I thought they did a very good job.
Us fans are thrilled to meet you here today, so thank you very much. If you could meet someone, either alive or dead, who would that be and why?
Well, I spend my time living sort of in the past, living in history. Alexander the Great. There was a really interesting survey done of history professors all around the country, asking for Western civilization who was the most important. And certainly in areas that are very religious areas, Bible Belt areas and what have you, you would think that, one would say Jesus. But it turned out that it was Alexander the Great because, and I can see why, because he actually Hellenized much of the world at the time. The level of how smart, how transcendent he was. I was listening also on the way coming in to a very in-depth discussion about Emily Dickinson. I went, oh wow, I would have loved to have met her if I could have ever enticed her to come out of her room. There's a wonderful podcast of the BBC. It's called In Our Time, and they deal with the most seemingly obscure, but not really. I mean, there was they talked about this woman, and Bear. I can't remember her first name. In the 1600s, she was a spy. She wrote right after Shakespeare wrote. Her plays were tremendously successful. She was a spy in France for the British. I mean, all these amazing stories, and so I live very much in that world.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking the question. I was curious, who did you have the most fun acting with on the Star Trek series, Patrick Stewart or Kate Mulgrew?
Well, I'm asked that a lot. The question, from your point of view, would probably, if I answered one as opposed to the other, you would go, oh, it's because you like someone. You like them more. That's not really what denotes having the most fun. Kate and I have known each other for years. We have spent a lot of time having over, drinks for hours and hours and hours chatting, and we're great friends. But the scenes between Kate and I were not quite as good, I think. It isn't that the writing was not as good as with Patrick and I, and the reason is this, and that is that they were so concerned that Kate, Janeway, might play it that she is infatuated with Q. And I kept on going, well, what would be wrong with that? Why not have that as a color, on our palette that we can play with? Because that, in a way, that's sort of the 800-pound gorilla in the room there. I mean, that's the part that the audience is going to go, oh, like that. But by stripping that away, and always having her have to play it, Q, I don't like you. I mean, the fact of the matter is, it's sort of, it just gets kind of a little poopy after a while. You kind of go, oh, really? And it's just not as much fun. So while Kate and I have a wonderful relationship with each other, and we laugh a lot and what have you, we could not quite bring that into the show. So the relationship with Q and not Patrick, but Picard, was not constrained from an acting point of view. And so those were the ones that one could say were a little more fun to play.
Thank you.
Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
Yeah.
I know you've been involved in many works over the course of your career, but I'm wondering what you consider to be your pinnacle role and why.
I just finished, actually not just, it was right about this time last year that I started. I did a show by John Robin Bates, very well-known writer, very brilliant writer, called Vicuña. And I played essentially Trump 2.0. It was a very difficult role, which I technically did well. So that would be one. Going many years back, Man and Superman was great fun in terms of I've never had a role where what I said was exactly what John Delancey thought, only said so much better. And that was great fun to do. But I have to say, as time has gone on, they become sort of, I don't know, I'm just pulling away from it. It's not easy. I'm very dyslexic. It's tough to learn these lines. I'm like, ugh. So unless something comes around that I go, oh my God, I've got to do that, like that show of last year, I'm spending more time writing material and things like that. Yeah, next.
Hi there. What's your favorite hobby, favorite thing to do on your downtime?
Well, I don't really have a hobby. I mean, put it this way, I sail. But it's sort of I sailed from California to Tahiti, so it's like, a lot of sailing. My trip back was 52 days at sea. So that's sort of a world that I go into. But in terms of hobbies, I always think of hobbies as, mounting butterflies or something like that, and in other words, things that you do at home and they're very contained. I do a lot of cooking. We have a lot of dinner parties. I mean, one of the things is that my friends in New York, I started in New York, they say they don't have the thing in Los Angeles is that you go to people's houses for dinner. So we have a group, kind of the usual suspects as it were, but we all go to each other's houses and for in some instances higher and higher levels of food porn. Where you taste this and drink that and stuff like that. So we spend a lot of time doing that. Everything I do is self-generated. There's nobody out there who says you have to do something. So it is, in a way, it's a life that, for those of you who have a job that you are working for the man, you would go, oh, isn't that great? But, like anything, the grass is greener when you have to get up every morning and go, okay, what am I going to be doing? It has its difficulties as well. So I write projects. I'm getting ready for another series of shows that I have written. I also am on a circuit, as it were. I'm very concerned about science being taught, that the best information that we have today, 2018, be taught to our children. And so I also speak around the country for the separation of church and state, to make sure that religion is not taught in classrooms any more than science be taught in churches. So those are some of the things I do.
Cool beans, thank you.
Yeah, cool beans. I've never heard that.
Hello.
Hi.
All right. So you mentioned liking to cook. What are some of your favorite things to cook for yourself?
Well, I just finished. That's for myself. I just finished doing a coq au vin for 18 people for Thanksgiving.
Oh, really?
I'm not a big turkey fan, so that was that. I have a great. Do you have a smoker?
No, not really.
They're not expensive as long as you have an outdoor area. I do a salmon, which is really easy, and it's an absolute knockout each and every time. So those are some of the things.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello. I was wondering, because we know now that Patrick Stewart is going to be coming back as Jean-Luc Picard. So I just wanted to ask you, how likely is it that we can expect to see the return of Q in the new series?
Oh, you know what? I've been, ever since, I guess, that announcement, people keep on asking me. This is, for me, as it would be for you. Imagine that there's, a friend in your circle, and they're having a dinner party, but you haven't been asked. All you know is that there's going to be a dinner party.
I see.
So your best bet is to not actually think about it too much, because you have nothing to do with that. The other thing is that, let's be serious here. Am I to be kind of like geriatric Q, Is it up and down the hallway in wheelchairs? That type of thing. I guess one could argue that, well, Q comes back to fit whatever age he's in, But I don't know. I don't think about it. It's only when you ask me that it's at all in my notions about anything.
Well, I think I speak on behalf of everyone that would be an amazing thing that if they would invite you to that dinner party. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi. So, how to word this out? Do you have favorite actors or people that you, in your work, you look to? Specifically, like if you're going to do a character, say Q, are there other performances that you go to draw upon inspiration from? Not necessarily Q, but overall, when I say we need a Breaking Bad.
No,
would
you
look
have
at
to be very careful about drawing on other performances, especially before you have brought the character or what it is that you're going to do into yourself, because it's very easy to miss a step in the process of preparing. I mean, this is a real acting question, so do you really want to acting
I'd love to
answer?
know. Is there
Okay.
someone that brought you into acting? Who do you admire?
Well,
Who do you-
I mean, the point is that you could have 10 people on in the row here, all of them looking like the character that you want them to play. So looking like the character is somewhat important, certainly in the area of television, a little less so in the area of theater because of the distance, but there's still an element of that. But if you could have 10 people here, all who could play the role, what you're really looking for is somebody who personalizes the role and brings themselves to the role along with what has been written on the page, okay? That's what makes the difference between just the other 9 people. My feeling is that in a greater or lesser sort of way, every character that exists somehow lives a little bit in you. There was a character that I once played a number of years ago called Bibał. That character was the commandant of the ghetto of Łódź in Poland. He was essentially a functionary. He was a numbers guy. He was the accountant. I can't even say that he was, everybody had to be part of the Nazi party who was going to succeed. He was not an ideologue. He was a functionary. But even so, the play had to do with these conversations between Bibał and Rumkowski, who was the elder Jewish, quote, mayor of the ghetto. The relationship that they had was that there was a ghetto, all the Jews were in the ghetto, and Bibał was using the people of the ghetto to make uniforms and pots and pans for the German army. A good deal. I mean, to the extent that Rumkowski had figured out a way to, quote, save his people by making them useful, and Bibał had found a way to become the best producer of blankets and uniforms and pots and pans for the German army. It's a symbiotic relationship. Into this relationship comes the final solution. So both men now find themselves at risk. We need, Bibał says to Rumkowski, I can't believe it, but I have to put 3,500 people on the train by Friday. Oh my God. And so this was a play about these conversations that go back and forth. I was having sort of a difficult time playing this. This guy was, from our point of view, a monster, but he didn't think of himself as a monster. So how do you play that? I had to find that part of myself that could play it. And it came to me about 6 or 7 days into rehearsals, as I was sort of flailing a little bit. I was standing in line and to buy a soda or whatever it was during lunch break, and the guy in front of me dropped a $5 bill. So I reached down and I said, "Here, thank you very much, right there." Then I went and got my stuff. And as I'm walking back, I went, ooh, I had another choice. I could have stepped forward and covered that $5 bill. And then it would have been mine. It would have been a secret. It would have been, sure, a little bit of dishonesty, but nobody would know about it. And then I began thinking, that's perhaps how Bebow got to be where he was. What he was doing was essentially sending people off on the train. Slave labor, then sending them off to their deaths. How do you get to that point? Well, I was trying to understand this character from that point in time, which is a lot to swallow. But now I could understand him from the point in time where all he had to do was go like this. So maybe when he was a little kid, or maybe when he was an adult, a young adolescent, he did that. And that started him off on a path of lying and self-deception that finally became a trap at this end. And I ended up playing the role. That was my way to get into it, because I went, I could do that. And so at the end, when I was negotiating back and forth, I need the 10-year-olds. Why don't we do it this way? Just put all the kids who are 10 and younger. That'll give us our 3,500. I could say it without going, like I'm a monster, but actually say it so that the audience was crying, but I went, ooh, I could do this. Now, that's the thing about acting, which is fun, is that I will never have to do that. I will never actually find out, what type of, but we're playing the what if game as actors. What if? What if? And the text, in this case, took me to that extreme. So that's how I approach my work. Okay. That's how I approach. I try to find that part of me that could actually do this. And I'm of the opinion, on a greater or lesser degree, that one is capable of doing all of these things. So when I got the role of Q, I had already, I was doing another show about Amundsen, Raoul Amundsen, who was the explorer who got to the South Pole first. I already had that part of it in my right. I was already exercising that part of me. I had found that part. So when I came to audition for Q, I looked at the material, I went, oh, yeah, okay, I understand this. I know how to do this. There's a part of me that knows how to do it. And I went in and I auditioned and I got the job. So for me, everything, years later did I look at, someone told me, Trelane.
Yeah, Squire Gothos.
If I had looked at Trelane first, I would have short-circuited that mechanism, right. And I would not have gotten to me. I'm sorry, really long-winded, but it was an acting question.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Hi there. Growing up and in my profession, I'm always amazed at how many people wind up where they've gotten, but that wasn't their original path. Like if you have somebody who was going to be a math teacher, but now they work on computers. Was there any occupation that you had when you were first starting that you thought maybe, I might have to do that instead?
No, there wasn't. I often think that, no, there wasn't. I was a kid who was very dyslexic, but at a time before they understood anything about dyslexia. And so they would simply say, well, he's slow, or he's mildly retarded. So I just flunked out of schools. And I flunked out of 2 schools. And here it is, I'm in this school, which was essentially for kind of wayward kids. My senior class was 18 or 19 kids. So we're talking about a little school. But we had sort of wayward teachers, perhaps a little bit. And we had this wonderful teacher called, his name was Mr. Biddle. And he was the head of the soccer team and the history teacher and the principal, the vice principal, and he would come in and he would just announce, we're going to do Mozart's Marriage of Figaro. We're like, yeah, whatever. And my God, he would force us to do it. We're going to do, it was all classical stuff. We're going to do Handel's Messiah, all of it. We're like, so we'd have the whole school who could get up, the whole school could get up on a platform. And this went from first grade or kindergarten to 12th grade, could get up on a platform which was maybe about twice the size of this platform here. So it was a tiny little school. And he came in one day, and it was in the springtime, and I was in the back of the class, yakking away. And all of a sudden, he threw a book at me, and it hit me square here, and got my attention, and he said, we're going to do Henry V. And Lancie, you're going to play Hal, and you have 2 months to learn it. Well, I had real difficulties reading it. But I learned it. I learned my little part. And I did it. And I was very fortunate to this extent. That is that a man had come to see his granddaughter in this show, in this little play that we did outside in Philadelphia. And he was the editor of the Pelican Shakespeare. And he took my father, who had come to see the show, he took my father to the side and he said, if your son has an interest, you should encourage him because he has a flair for this. And that summer, my father said to me, this is a month later, have you ever thought, he's talking to a 14-year-old, have you ever thought of being an actor? Now, you have to understand, as far as he was concerned, for a kid who had just flunked out of everything, this was kind of like any port in a storm. I mean, how many parents ask their children if they want to be actors? And I just remember thinking, oh, God, what a stupid thing to say. But it began to work on me. And I did, by the time I left that school, I did Henry IV, Romeo and Juliet, Midsummer Night's Dream, and I ended with Hamlet. So I grabbed onto it sort of like a life preserver, because I was not good in school, and nobody knew why, except that I couldn't read. And so I grabbed onto it. Many years later, I have been successful at it. There are lots of times that it's held me back, the inability to be really good with text. Can't tell you how many times I turned things down because just learning the lines was so excruciating. So I often thought, gee, what else would I have done? And I've never really come up with anything. So maybe this is what I was meant to do.
Thank you.
All right, here's my question. Have you seen Seth MacFarlane's new show on Fox called The Orville? It's heavily inspired by Star Trek and has a consistent amount of humor. Are you familiar with it? And given your vast experience as Hugh, I'm interested if you have an opinion on this show. Additionally, if they asked you to make a guest appearance on The Orville, do you think you would accept it?
I have not seen the show, and it isn't because I actively don't want to see it. It's because I don't have a television. I'm just tired of, about, I don't know, 10 years ago, I just went, we're spending how much? This is ridiculous. We don't watch anything. I watch movies. I watch documentaries. I've heard about the show. I understand it's really well done. Of course, it would be nice to be asked, but nobody's asked me, and I don't know the show.
All right, thank you for answering.
It must be such a drag to listen to an actor say he doesn't have a television set, but.
So I believe that you wore both the uniform from TNG and Voyager, and Deep Space Nine. Which one was more comfortable wearing?
Oh my God! You are down into the weeds now. I can't tell you. I mean, I can probably tell you what the rest of the crew has said, and that is that those kind of jumpsuit uniforms are, there's nothing to hide behind. They are unyielding in their exposure. I don't know. I can't tell you.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.